Welcome, everyone, to the 1960s Project. The 1960s Project brings you voices from the 1960s. In the 1960s Project, we've been recalling, remembering, and reflecting on events that have influenced our lives. We have been exploring futuristic scenarios. Before we get into our futuristic scenario show, which we'll talk about in a minute, and before we get into other preliminaries, as we were waiting to come on, and one of the reasons we were delayed was we wanted to hear the verdict of the trial. And I thought we would spend a few minutes as a group here talking about the trial. I have with me Lewis Hicks. Welcome, Lewis, and David Lang, and Sharon Pugh. We'll let David lead the discussion because David is a lawyer and he's tried criminal cases. And I guess, have you been a criminal defense lawyer as well, David?
Or just... that's what I was when I was practicing criminal law. I was a criminal defense lawyer.
So, David, tell us about what your opinion of the trial is.
Well, I mean, I thought the prosecution did a great job. I thought they did an excellent job in closing, in that they kept it very simple and let the testimony of the prior witnesses speak for themselves, especially the young girl who witnessed the whole thing. And I thought that the defense spent way too long with a 3-hour closing argument. That's too long for a jury. You're going to lose their attention. And so, I mean, the strategy of the defense was to obfuscate, but you can't obfuscate at the point that you're doing your closing argument. So I thought that was not too good.
Oh, so there were 3 counts of that he was found guilty on. What's the significance of someone being charged with 3 counts?
Well, typically in a situation like that, the prosecution wants to have alternative charges in case the jury doesn't want to convict on the highest charge that carries along the sentence. So they charge other, what we call lesser included offenses, and the jury can pick ultimately. The jury can convict on all of them, but my understanding, my recollection is that the double jeopardy clause prevents you from being sentenced for the same homicide. In other words, only one person was killed, so you can't have 3 different homicide convictions arising out of the same set of operative facts. And so,
when you say double jeopardy,
double jeopardy clause of the
Constitution. David, I know you love this stuff. Can you slow it down a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So what is double jeopardy?
A person cannot be tried twice for the same offense under the U.S. Constitution.
Okay. And so, but there were 3 charges. So how does the judge, or who decides which of the 3 charges apply in this particular case?
Well, the jury can convict on all of the charges, but the prosecution has to make an election. So typically the prosecution would elect the verdict that carries, or the charge that carries the longest sentence, and the most serious charge. So that would be the second-degree murder charge.
Second-degree murder charge. Sharon, what was your reaction to the verdict?
Well, I'm surprised it came back so quickly, but I agree with the verdict. And I don't understand, I don't understand all the charges and why you have murder 2, murder 3, and manslaughter. But the 2 murder charges carried the same sentencing. And also, I believe, I think the defendant waived. There was something about a Blakesley waiver yesterday, where my understanding was the judge can consider extenuating circumstances or something in making the sentencing. In other words, although the 2 murder charges carry with 12.5 years each, the judge could elect to make a longer sentence. That's my understanding, and I am not a lawyer, so I may be correct or wrong.
All right. David, you have anything about that?
I think the case that they're referring to, I think, is a Minnesota case. So these things have different names in different jurisdictions. So I think they're talking about aggravating factors that allows the judge to enhance enhance the penalty. And I'm not sure, since this is all statutory, I don't know how specifically it works in Minnesota.
Can the judge have the option of reducing the penalties?
Well, the judge always typically has the option of what he's going to do as far as assigning the sentence. If there's no mandatory sentence that the judge must impose, then any sentence is discretionary on the part of the judge.
Okay. Lewis, what was your, while we were waiting to come on, you heard the verdict. What was your response?
I was relieved because many times like this, I think about Trayvon Martin trial and how George Zimmerman got off, and it seemed like it was an open and shut case. And I just feared that this police officer was going to be declared not guilty. And so once again, it would show that people of color were not judged according to the same ways in a courtroom that non-white people are, or white people. And so all people of color basically don't get a fair trial in the majority of the cases that we've seen over and over. So I thought it was going to be a repeat of that, but I'm relieved to see that justice has been served. And I'm sure the people living in the cities are going to be more settled and not upset because of the verdict rendered in this trial.
Well, while the case was, oh, go ahead, Sharon.
I was going to say, I'd like to make one comment. I think just like the murder itself of George Floyd, I think was really eye-opening to the majority of the country, to the people, to the white people of the country, people not of color. I think they could see just how callous Black lives have been taken at the hands of law enforcement. I think that's the first time, just seeing it videotaped for the however long, the 9.5 minutes, the 10 minutes, that length of time where you're seeing this happening, this man's death occurring during that period of time. I think that was eye-opening to America. And as a result, I'm hoping that this verdict will bring about some final resolution or recognition to the need for legislative changes, police reform, the whole bit. Although the prosecution continuously said this is not a trial of police or the Minnesota police force or police reform. It was an individual police officer, but also because that blue line, that blue wall did not hold firm. I think it's a new day. I think it's a new day in America.
Okay. Yeah. How do you feel that as the trial was going on, Black men were still being killed by police?
Well, I mean, that's not going to stop because the trial is taking place. That's endemic to the police mentality in this country, and there is a fear of Black men. So often, Black men are projected in the minds of the police officers with having objects in their hand, like a cell phone. And in their mind, they actually will see a gun because you see what your mind projects. That's how it works.
One of the things I find in terms of some of the defenses given in the case of George Floyd and other is that the police officers create a situation that threatens them, and then they want to blame the threatening part on the victim. So, for example, constantly people are running away from the police and they're being shot. There's no reason to shoot. It seems to be when it becomes to a Black male, it seems that the ability to de-escalate seems to go out the door, and no way to manage or de-escalate the situation, and as if the only option is to shoot, and it's just way too many times that we see Black people being killed because of a traffic violation or they talk back to a policeman. These are professionals, and they should be able to handle those kinds of situations. Louis, you go ahead.
Yeah, one of the other things that always just kind of makes me very upset is to see the fact that usually whenever a white person is wielding a gun, the police have a way of negotiating and getting that person into custody. Take the example of the young guy that walked into the church, killed all those people. He was taken into custody. He was taken to get a hamburger on the way to the police station prior. And then there was a guy on the beach in Florida holding a gun, and the police were negotiating. They'll negotiate with a white person for several hours, but more than likely, a black person will always end up being killed.
Right, within seconds.
Yes.
Yes, within
I
seconds.
heard in some commentary this week that a lot of police forces consider themselves paramilitary. Not, I shouldn't say consider themselves paramilitary, but they use the military example for how they enforce law. And that's inherently a problem, because in the military and warfare, you have a declared enemy. And citizens, they're aliens to your country. We are citizens of the same country, so we should not be considered as enemies unless we're, terrorists or something like that. And I think that's the mindset to begin with, where they view us the fear of Black people, because it's women as well as men.
True.
There's an inherent fear of law enforcement with Black people, and it's not just white law enforcement. It can be Black law enforcement as well. But there is an inherent fear, and they, as Louis was saying, they do not take the time to de-escalate a situation. And I think when you talk about, what was it, Dante Wright, when you have his murder less than 10 miles from where this trial was occurring, that clearly brought on a lot of tension. And I think that has added weight to this particular verdict.
You mentioned the paramilitary nature of the police forces, and that's something that started in the 60s. And since this is a 1960s project, it goes back to the whole shift in policing in the United States. And also in the 60s and the 70s, and mainly as part of the crime bill in the 90s, is that the local military forces began to get surplus. The local police forces began to get surplus military equipment. And so they're armed like there are occupation forces, which is ironic, because if we take the Army as an U.S. Army as example, it often has to play three roles. It's the role of war fighting, which we are familiar with, but it's also the war. It's also a peacekeeping role. They have to play that sometimes. And sometimes they have to play a policing role. And so the Army is able to shift between what's the appropriate role to play at the appropriate time, whether you're fighting a war, whether you are policing, or whether you are a peacekeeping operation. Here for American U.S. police forces, they seem to only have an on-off switch. You're either occupying and controlling, or you are. But that is the only option they have, is one of occupation and control. So, Louis, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm just agreeing, because a lot of times, I was never a military enlistee, so I can understand that dilemma, but I've had lots of family where they're policing in a hostile area. Take, for instance, Afghanistan or the Middle East. And there we are as occupiers, rather than someone coming to basically help win a war. And, when you have two factions of the people of the same country vying for control of the country, you become a police, but you also end up taking sides. And whether or not that's justified or not is the dilemma of the military.
I just like
David, you want to close this segment out?
Well, yeah, I just want to make a comment. So I'm I'm 72 years old. I grew up in the the 50s and the 60s, and back in the 50s in St. Louis, I lived only 15-minute ride from Ferguson, Missouri. And when I was a child, uh, the police officers weren't in patrol cars; they walked the beat. And in the neighborhood, in the black neighborhoods, all of the police officers were white, and they were very friendly. So you could go up to the police officers, and you could, they would let you play with their utility belts, and typically you were in the Boy Scouts or the Cub Scouts, and so you identified with the police officers. You were the police officer's friend, and they knew all the kids in the neighborhood. And my mother was typically send us out with ice water in the summertime to bring them water, and so it was a very friendly relationship. When I became about 11 or 12, they put all the police officers in scout cars, and that's when everything changed because now they were like an occupation force. There was no personal interaction with the police officers anymore. You couldn't see them. They were behind the glass in their scout cars, and that's when everything changed in terms of the relationships.
All right. Well, there's a lot to tease out, a lot of discussion. I'm glad you were accommodating to take a few moments to discuss this important issue. And we're going to shift over now to our futuristic scenarios. And for the listening audience, what do we mean by futuristic scenarios? Well, in January, when we started our new season, we talked about a concept called memories of the future. And memories of the future helps us talk about what might take place in the future so that we can get ready for it. So when the future comes, we can be prepared. This last week, the first kickoff, it was the first session we had for our futuristic scenario in this month of April, was on looking at a holistic education model in dealing with children children and adults in that case who are perceived as the other, and how we can begin to embrace them and accommodate their learning styles. And that we got a lot of positive feedback on that. O'Keller Page Trice was the one who developed that scenario. Today's scenario, which was just flashed up, is called the Trial of Elon Musk. And this is a scenario that was developed by David Lang. And we're going to talk about the future of technology at one level. And our conversation, we're going to unfold as a reading of a script. And David is going to be Samuel Jackson, and Samuel Jackson is indicting Elon Musk, and Lewis Hicks is going to be Elon Musk. And this is all taking place within the context of a show that started airing in 1959 and had 3 or 4 seasons in the 1960s, called the Twilight Zone. And the Twilight Zone host was Rod Serling, set up these questions that people had to begin to explore and answer. And Sharon is going to be Rod Serling. So I'll wait about 5 seconds for Ty to bring up the music, and then we're going to do a reading or an enactment of the Trial of Elon Musk.
You unlocked this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You are moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the 2025 Twilight Zone. You are about to meet the title of The World's Greatest Genius, and aspires to the title of the world's richest. A man who carries on his shoulders a chip the size of the national debt. Mr. Elon Musk, who's owned by megalomania, is about to catapult him into the darkest corner of the 2025 Twilight Zone.
Do you know who I am, Elon?
You look like the actor Samuel Jackson. Is that right?
Bingo! You win the prize. Very perceptive, Elon. And do you know why you're here?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Crimes against humanity. You are on trial for crimes against humanity, Elon.
Crimes against humanity? You got to be kidding.
Yes, Mother Hubbard, crimes against humanity. You remember uttering these words back in July 2017? There certainly will be job disruption because what's going to happen is robots will be able to do everything better than us. I mean, all of us. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to do about this. This is really the scariest problem to me, I will tell you. A speech you made to the National Governors Association in July 2017. Do you recall it?
Yes, I recall it.
Well, that's one of the main reasons you're here. That's one of the charges in the indictment.
Indictment? You got to be kidding.
Yes, Mother Hubbard, indictment. Meet Martin Rubber Duck Penwall. He used to have a good job as an over the road truck driver. He was able to support his wife and three children. Now, with this guaranteed minimum income bull, he only gets $25,000 a year. You think he can support his beautiful wife, Violet, and his three kids on that, Mother Hubbard? All transport trucks are now driverless. You put all of the big rig drivers out of work.
Well, he could get a part-time job like most people.
No, Elon, there are almost no part time jobs. You and your rival, Jeff Bezos, seem to have taken care of that. Robots are doing everything from taking orders at McDonald's to washing windows and cleaning houses. The bots are ubiquitous. They're multiplying like mother hubbing rabbits. I'm going to place the following three photographs in the evidence. Any objection, Elon?
How can I object? I don't even know who these people are, or what the significance of the photos. How can I object?
The first photo is the Nelson family, a typical young white American family. The second photo is the Huxtables, a young African American family. Both families were killed in an accident involving one of the driverless trucks that you developed last year, the Tesla Express. The truck's computer system was hacked on I 95 by some sicko wannabe serial killer. Does this next picture refresh your memory?
Not
You
at
were
all.
You were so arrogant to assume that your Tesla self-driving cars and trucks could not be hacked. There is no computer system that cannot be hacked. This is the result of your arrogance. So that wraps up count two of the indictment. Second degree negligent murder based on reckless indifference. Now let's move on to count three, Elon. I'm placing into evidence the following picture. Now I know you're not going to tell me that you don't know who that is, are you, Elon? But before you answer, let me take you back to a little speech you gave just over 4 years ago on CNBC, February 21st, 2021. You were bragging about a company that you recently founded
the lead prosecutor for the case
called Neuralink.
and patience to review the
Neuralink put a computer chip in a chimp's skull and wired him to play video games with its mind. You connected tiny wires to his brain. Do you admit to doing this, don't you, Elon? Or would you like to see the videotape of the interview?
Well, yes, I did, but
No buts, Elon. The little chimp's name is Caesar, correct? And that's him to the immediate left in the picture,
well,
right?
yes, but
I told you
what?
before,
What?
Elon, no buts. So here's my question. Why in hell's name would you have a chip playing the video game Grand Theft Auto surrounded by big brute guerrilla gang members with an AK-47? Did it ever occur to you that little Caesar might develop a thirst for violent behavior? And before you answer that, did it ever occur to you that little Caesar might not want to play a video game that required him to have an effing computer chip inserted in his brain? I know that it didn't occur to you because you have a mother hubba God complex. Whatever the F Elon thinks of, Elon does. And Little Caesar was just a prelude to your real goal, to plant computer chips into the brain of every human being on the face of the earth. Isn't that correct, Elon? In fact, you are hoping to start human trials by next year if you can get approval from the Food and Drug Administration. Isn't that true, Elon? Didn't you say that in the CNN interview?
Well, yes, but
But I've told you for the last time, no buts, Elon. You are not unsure. You know exactly what the F you want to do. Now, before I move on to the final charge, I have one final question about your poor little guinea pig Caesar. Isn't it true that you said in that same CNN interview, it's a happy monkey? Do I have to play the videotape? I take it by your silence that I do not. So here's my question. How in the F do you know that Caesar is happy about having a Mother Hubbard computer chip wired to his brain? Or that he likes your effing video game selection? That's okay. You don't have to answer. That's a rhetorical question. So, before we get to the verdict, I want to tell you just how you got here. I have two more pictures for you to look at. Now, you, of course, recognize the picture of your loyal butler, Joffrey Mandela. That's a rhetorical question as well, Eli. A man who has given years of his life in loyal service to you. And yet you repaid Joffrey for his years of service by giving him 2 weeks' notice and telling him you were replacing him with a robot butler named G. What a crock. Unfortunately for you, Elon, Joffrey was not willing to take your BS lying down. He joined our secret underground organization, the Guardians of Humanity. And do you know who introduced him to our organization and betrayed you? Take a look at this photo that you know oh so well. That's right, Elon. Your beloved little retro hippie, retro grungy, spaced out girlfriend, Grimes. She is a charter member of the Guardians of Humanity. She was our plan. Joffrey spiked your evening cocktail, and Grimes disabled all of your security cameras. It was a cakewalk putting you into our van and whisking you off to our underground complex to conduct this trial.
you call this a trial? This is a travesty. Where's my lawyer? And anyway, where's the jury? How can you even conceive of something like this?
Where indeed you play God every day. So it's more than fitting that I am your sole judge, jury, and possible execution. Behold the lightsaber of justice. I'm going to count to three, Eli, and if the lightsaber of justice is still pointed upward, you will be acquitted with no punishment. But if the lightsaber of justice is pointed down, then you will receive the appropriate retribution. Are you ready to meet your fate, Eli?
Beads of sweat poured from Elon's forehead. His face turned red. His eyes stared stonily ahead, and he took a long, deep breath.
1, 2, 3. Elon Musk, you have been found guilty of crimes against humanity. All counts of the indictment have been sustained. Is there anything you would like to say before you receive your punishment?
Yes, first of all, I envision uh, Neuralink being used to allow humans to send concepts to one another, basically through telepathy and exist in a safe state after they die that could then be put into a robot or another human. In the near term, all I wanted to do was to implant Neuralink chips into quadriplegics who have a brain or spinal cord injuries, so that in the end, they can have control of a computer mouse or their phones or really any device that they may be thinking about. My motives were basically pure.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Elon. You are a menace to society. And how do I know that? Because we planted one of your mother effing Neuralink chips into your own damn brain before your trial began. We just turned off the total recall functionality so you would not remember what had been done to you. We know everything that you have been thinking. Your main motivation was topping Jeff Bezos as the world's richest man. You couldn't accept being number two, but the total recall function has now been restored, so you will have to relive your crimes for the rest of your life.
A shaken Elon Musk recognized for the first time the enormity of his crimes against humanity and how they would be replayed over and over for the remainder of his conscious life. In the recesses of his conscious mind, suddenly a new image flashed into view. He recognized it as a scene featuring one of Samuel L. Jackson's most famous cinematic dialogues from the Quentin Tarantino film noir classic, Pulp Fiction.
The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who, in the name of charity and goodwill, shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who would attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. Ezekiel chapter 25, verse 17.
Elon remembered Samuel L. Jackson's character in Pulp Fiction, Jules Winfield. A human always quoted Ezekiel chapter 25, verse 17 as a hitman just before he dispatched a victim into the next life simply because he thought it was a cool line for a victim to hear just before he met his maker. In Elon's mind, the infamous Bible verse was now playing in an endless loop. This image of Jules Winfield faded to black. In Elon's Neuralink world, the guardians of humanity had cooked up quite a punishment for the man who would be God. There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. You're on mute, Jerome.
More time. What were the 3 indictments or 4 indictments? Do you remember?
He had eliminated all of the jobs to robots. He had that included the truck driver's job and his loyal butler. He had implanted a computer chip in the brain of a monkey, and he actually did that just last year, and had him playing video games. So that's the second. And I don't know why Peter never came out and said anything about that. That was, I thought, very unusual. uh, he eliminated his butler's job, Jeffrey's job, and so I think that was it.
Okay. So why do you call them crimes against humanity?
Well, I call them crimes against humanity because certainly I think implanting a chip in the brain of any living creature is to me is shocking because we don't know what effect that will have on the consciousness of the sentient being. We don't know whether or not that person's consciousness will be under the control of an outside entity. So I think that is a crime against humanity. I certainly think it's a crime if you're planning on inserting chips. It's not as if we don't know where this is headed, because eventually everyone will have a chip.
Okay. Lewis, Mr. Elon Musk, how did you feel playing the part of Elon Musk?
Well, I felt pretty much in the role where I felt like I was blindsided by the whole thing. So it was fun for me to take on a character that I would not be in a position, nor would I think in a manner to, because I'm all about humanity. And basically, even though it may not be a futuristic scenario where we have machines, I believe in engaging people in all kinds of ways. So kind of a switch for me to assume the role.
How did you feel being indicted? Do you think
I
the
felt,
indictments were fair?
I'm sorry?
Do you think the indictments were fair?
Yes. I think they were, just by,
Wait, you
not
remember
for me
you're Elon
as
Musk now.
Elon, but
You're Elon.
yes. Well, no, actually, no, because I would not want to go to jail, nor would I. I'm all about advancing humanity. So I wanted to make sure that we advanced and people got the kinds of things to help them as living with someone formerly as a quadriplegic. I could see how it would have benefited and been a help to them for scientific ways as well as humanitarian reasons.
Well, let me ask you a question before I go to Sharon. Don't you think that Samuel Jackson cherry picked the evidence? He shows this fiery crash of this Tesla.
All the more reason that, well, jumped in there, but all the more reason that a lawyer makes his case. It may not always necessarily include all the facts, but they cherry pick to make the strongest case possible.
But what if I told you that in the last year that 39,107 Americans died in automobile accidents, and that if we had driverless cars, that number could drop to 0?
Well, I think about the case just the other day that I'm dealing with as Elon Musk, where we had a passenger in the passenger seat and someone in the back seat. So we still have some kinks to iron out as far as driverless cars. So I don't think they're completely safe at this point.
What if I told you that under regular circumstances, that there's 1.2 deaths for every 100 million miles driven, and for every 100 million miles driven for Teslas, there's fewer than 1.2 deaths. And actually, Tesla data suggests that it's safer than the cars with drivers.
Well, you also have to remember the reason they were put into use is not to free the driver so that he's on the other side like that passenger, but they're driver controlled. So part of the issues, I think people have to consider in the future, it doesn't completely relieve you. They showed on the news the other day of this passenger being filmed, well, this driver being filmed completely asleep, slumped over as if he was in his house taking a nap, but he was at the wheel and he was driving and his passenger was also asleep in the car, and they were captured by a passenger in another car alongside them. So
okay, I hear you. You pulling up the. I thought you were going to be defending Elon, but you right up there with the. I'm not going to hire you as my defense attorney.
I know, but the idea is that the driver has a responsibility also. These cars are designed to help you, but also you have to take some responsibility.
Okay, Sharon, how did you feel in the role of Rod Serling? Did you ever watch the Twilight Zone when you were back in the 60s?
Absolutely. It was one of my favorite TV shows.
And why was it one of your favorite shows?
I think just because it was probably science fiction. It was serious. it was a drama that wasn't overly serious, but it discussed serious scenarios and situations. And I think the other thing is, to me, it was always a matter of, not all, because some of them were kind of creepy, but the ones that weren't creepy, it was a matter of be careful for what you wish. You
True.
may get what you wish for, and it may not be exactly what you thought it was going to be. And I think that is typical in this case of the Elon Musk, because the autonomy, one of the things, particularly with autonomous vehicles, is the robots are doing so-called the thinking. And robots don't think. Robots are programmed. So, you miss something there. And the other thing, it's not going to work till you have to go all or none. It has to be all autonomous vehicles or none, because they're thinking along a computerized script, but they don't react to human behavior. And as long as you've got that mix of human behavior in there, the robots cannot plan that kind of reactionary situation.
Yeah, I felt like Elon had a kangaroo trial. He didn't have a defense attorney. He
All
wasn't
right.
allowed to speak.
Thank you.
He was accused of being arrogant, but the prosecution was behaving the same way it was exhibiting the same behaviors he was accusing Elon Musk of engaging in.
Jerome, remember, this was the 2025 Twilight Zone, okay? You're caught between shadow and light. It's a weird dimension. There's no time. There's no space.
Thank you, Sharon.
So all of these issues and beliefs and emotions converge. You cannot view this trial from the 2021 perspective of the real world, okay?
Okay. So are you saying that the morality has shifted by 2025? We got a new morality in 2025?
Do we have a morality now?
Well, I think under current jurisprudence is that you're innocent until you're proven guilty, and if it's a criminal case, you don't have to prove your innocence. The state has to establish your guilt.
Well, in this court, in the Twilight Zone court, it was announced that Samuel L. Jackson was going to be judge, jury, and executioner, and Elon Musk submitted himself to that. So he knew what he was getting into. And he knew how Samuel L. Jackson was.
Well, I don't know whether he just said, well, I think you're that guy who played, I think you that chocolate guy.
No, he said he knew who Samuel L. Jackson was. No.
Oh, Elon knows who Samuel Jackson is.
Yeah, that was.
He looks like him.
That's the way it was written. He knew who Samuel L. Jackson was.
You say
that's the irony of the situation.
Yeah, okay.
Because he was dealing with the real Samuel L. Jackson, who was playing his on-screen persona. Okay, and so there's nobody that can cuss you out better than Samuel L. Jackson. People derive vicarious satisfaction. We might want to cuss out somebody, but we can't do it because that's not socially acceptable. But when Samuel L. Jackson does it to somebody, we're right there. I would love to have an episode where we get Derek Chauvin on trial before Samuel L. Jackson, and he gets the business. Let me tell you.
But David, I have to disagree with you. I have no vicarious experience to watch somebody being cussed out by Samuel Jackson. It does nothing for me.
Oh, but it does for a lot of people. We understand that that's not your experience, but I think I pointed out to you there were when I was practicing for the role, I just Googled Samuel L. Jackson on YouTube, and there were video clips. Somebody had one titled 200 MFs, Samuel L. Jackson, because they said that wasn't all that he had. And people write scripts for Samuel L. Jackson just so he can cuss. That's his.
Yeah, well,
his
I,
time.
I I think cussing represents a poverty of language, the inability to express oneself.
Well, see, that's your particular opinion
Oh yeah,
because
I'm
I
sharing
think,
my opinion.
Jerome, I think the key is Samuel L. Jackson personifies such a sinister character himself personally, and then in his on-screen characters. Samuel L. Jackson can do a Capital One commercial, and it can still send chills through you. You know, just and what's in your wallet? He's indicting. It's just the venom that comes through his speech and his demeanor.
right. If you remember Richard Wright's famous novel Black Boy, it was about a guy who went through life cussing. That's what it was about because he knew a person, he knew characters like that. All they did was cuss. And so there is some therapeutic aspect for a lot of people to cussing. As Samuel L. Jackson says,
I'm
when
gonna
he
I'm gonna,
used,
I'm gonna I'm gonna start a movement for new therapy so that we can become cathartic without devolving into language that is offensive and
well, that's only your opinion that the language is offensive. That's your particular position. Look, Dave Chappelle won the um, Mark Twain Award for comedy, and was at the Kennedy Center accepting the award. His comedy skits are full of MFs,
I don't
and
watch him
so
either. I don't watch him either.
well, I understand, but what I'm saying to you is that's Jerome. So that's your particular value system. Everybody doesn't share that particular value system.
Right. Okay.
But Jerome, don't you think that obscenities they emote a certain feeling? And regardless of the actual word that you use, you can put substitutes in. And I can go around and say, oh crap, oh crap. And I'm cussing. I'm not using an obscenity, but I'm cussing.
Well, Louis, how do you emote?
I fall back to the 1950s, very sanitized version. Aw shucks, or shoot, or gosh. That's about it.
Okay.
Oh shucks! You're gonna tell me that's not offensive?
I grew up with a kid. His mother didn't cuss, and he didn't cuss, and they only had one word that they used as a substitute. It was "oh raspberry." So anytime that they wanted to say a cuss word instead, "oh raspberry." Okay, now that just doesn't carry the same oomph and emotional thrill. Okay,
Well,
that another word that's
they
more
need
colorful would.
they also need to expand their vocabulary as well. So we'll work on that. We'll have a vocabulary lesson later on one of
Okay.
those shows. But
See,
thank you
that's
very
the
much.
point, Jerome. There's no substitute for a specific word.
That's right.
Well, I'll take your word for it. So that means that my language is limited then. Is that what you're
Your
saying?
language is very limited.
Okay, because I don't swear and cuss and emote that way.
Well, here's the thing.
Does that reduce my ability to communicate how I feel?
No, it doesn't. But here's the point, Jerome. There are people who I don't cuss in public. I gave up using the term MF when I was 18 years old, a freshman at Howard. I had gotten some real good grades, and I was kind of surprised about some of the A's I got, and I was saying, "Oh, MF this, MF that," and a secretary came out of the office, and I was so embarrassed that at that point I decided I wouldn't use the word MF ever again. Now, so there are people who know me for years, and if you ask them, they would say, "Well, David doesn't cuss." I only cuss in certain situations around certain friends where we can all relax. I have a friend who's a minister who I went to law school with. So we might use the N word, but only between the two of us. We might use MF, but only between the two of us. But we would never do it in public.
Well, I'm going to do an intervention on you one day. But in the meantime, thank you, everybody, for playing your roles. The Trial of Elon Musk. Louis played Elon Musk. David was Samuel Jackson indicting Elon Musk, and Sharon took us rod stealing into that fifth dimension, where we have new types of courtrooms, new standards of evidence, and new types of morality. I remind you, you're listening to the 1960s Project, and the 1960s Project brings you voices from the 1960s. And as you can see, we framed this evening's discussion in the context of the Twilight Zone, which aired first in 1959 and then ran for 3 or 4 seasons in the 1960s. As we close, I would like for you to ask 4 things of you. One is to like and follow us on Facebook. The second is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Third is to read and comment on our blogs. And since we're in the social media world, please share our shows, video, and blogs. Again, thank you very much. And we'll be, let me, before I close, I want to thank everybody for taking the first part of the show to talk about the verdict in the Derek Floyd case. So thank you and good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.